Looking out the window, Brian was somehow strangely saddened. It seemed that a serious problem was gnawing him from the inside. He was distracted from his thoughts by a knock on the door. "Yes, come in. Oh, it's you, Mark. You could have just walked in. What's going on with the two warehouses? I was told there are problems with the service staff." A trusted man was standing in front of Brian, who was supposed to have all the current information. "Well, how can I put it? There is a serious lack of workers. I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and as soon as I find out anything, I will report to you immediately." Brian didn't like his answer. "No. If the problem needs to be addressed, I should deal with it personally. I'll think about how to do it, and for now, let's drive to the employment office." Surprised by such a request, Mark asked, "And what are we going to do there? Are you going to check the labor market?" Brian didn't like being contradicted. "I think I said where we need to go. The car should be ready in 5 minutes and waiting at the entrance. And make sure there are no unnecessary comments. I'll figure out how to act next myself." Mark left downstairs, while Brian, once again alone in his luxurious office, wondered why people had become so careless. And just as he began to consider possible answers, a thought immediately popped into his mind. It's all about money. Take Mark himself. He gets a decent salary, so he doesn't bother to work for the good of the business. No, Brian was not satisfied with this approach to work. Although he was a wealthy man, a millionaire, he still valued every penny. And if there was a chance to earn more, he didn't put it off. Sitting in the back seat, Brian took out the morning newspaper and for some reason began browsing the ads. Mark noticed this, but pretended to be focused only on the road. Driving past the square and then the city park, Brian saw many young people in their 20s and was very surprised that they were leading a leisurely lifestyle without thinking about their future. At that moment, the traffic light turned red and Mark braked. Brian leaned against the glass and said, "That's how their whole life goes by. No worries. Their parents will do everything for them, and then they turn out to be unprepared for an independent life." Mark didn't know how to respond. Engage in the conversation or pretend it doesn't concern him. Anyway, he decided to answer, "You're right, Brian. They have no life goals yet, but maybe in time they will appear. The important thing here is the desire to develop and grow. Unfortunately, today's youth have changed their priorities, and they tend more to live in pleasures and idleness." Brian supported the driver. "I agree with you on that. They have lost their life guidance." Turning into the yard in front of the employment office building, Mark got out of the car and then opened the door for his boss. Brian stretched his shoulders and headed for the front entrance. But there he got an unpleasant surprise. The security guard blocked his way and angrily growled, "Entry only by appointment. Show your ticket." Not understanding what was happening, Brian said indignantly, "I just want to look at the information I need, and I'm not even going to look for work." Looking at Mark, he immediately added, "Find out what's going on there and explain to this guard that he's wrong." Spreading his arms to the sides, as if wanting to pat the shoulders, Mark approached the guardian of order. "Listen, friend, let's part amicably. It's not right to scare people here." Then he took the guard aside and Brian didn't hear what they were talking about. But after 2 minutes, Mark returned and happily reported, "Boss, your order has been carried out and the impregnable fortress has surrendered." Brian glanced at him with a displeased look. "Let's go already, Joker. You always want to play and clown around." Inside, it was noisy, and Brian thought that today was some special day and people had gathered here from all over the city. But no, just an ordinary day. He just forgot when he last appeared here. It must have been about 7 years ago when Brian had just started his business. Since then, a lot has changed, especially the attitude of subordinates to their duties. However, almost all employees of the employment office remained, with rare exceptions of personnel reshuffles. Meeting one of the employees of the institution in the corridor, Brian asked, "Hello, how's the situation with workers? Are there enough professionals of all kinds?" Gesturing at the people in the hall, the employee briskly replied, "As you can see, there are no fewer people. Everyone wants to find work, and someone wants to change to earn more. And what brought you here, Brian? Have you decided to leave business and become an ordinary worker? Laughing at her joke, Brian replied, "No, I'm all set in that regard. I just wanted to see if everything is so sad with professionals. I suspect someone is leading me by the nose." At this, Brian angrily looked at Mark, and he even cringed, as if from the cold. The employee shook his hand and went to her office. After standing in the hall a little longer, Brian also headed for the exit. "I need to go to one more place. I want to buy some things for myself. I haven't updated my wardrobe in a long time." Happy that his boss decided to go shopping, Mark didn't spare the car and raced at full speed. It seemed he was also planning to spot something for himself. Moreover, Brian often allocated personal money for this. But how disappointed he was when his boss asked to stop near a store that sold discounted clothing. Such places usually displayed the cheapest and poorest quality goods on the shelves. Mark dejectedly lowered his head. "Well, yes, I thought we would go to the mall or at least to the Post Zoom Boutique." "Brian, what are we doing here? Do you want to change your image or are you up to something again?" Not listening to his lamentations, Brian approached the saleswoman and asked her to show him the cheapest tracksuit. Mark watched all this and could not understand what was happening with his boss. He didn't seem to have lost his mind, yet he was buying clothes that did not match the status of a wealthy man. Continuing to talk to the saleswoman, Brian commanded Mark from behind his back, "You will carry all the clothes to the car that I will hand you. And why are you staring? Haven't you seen people try on a tracksuit? Remember, Mark, I still have the right to decide for myself what and how to wear. If you want, you can also choose something for yourself." He refused the offer. "I think I'll abstain from shopping here. This store does not inspire my confidence, and I see no point in changing my expensive suit for cheap rags." Brian didn't insist. "As you wish, Mark, but don't say later that I begrudged money. You know that how my employees look is important to me, and as for these cheap clothes, I will need them outside the city. I want to dig in the ground a little this weekend, so I'm preparing the gear in advance. Wait, what? Did you think I would go to my office looking like this?" Mark nodded like a parrot. "Well, yes. I even imagined for a moment what your subordinates in the office would think about you. By the way, regarding those warehouses you talked about in the morning, we should probably take a look there sometime. The employees haven't seen you yet, and it seems somewhat incorrect to keep them unaware of who the boss is." Brian thought he was right. "Especially since I've wanted to meet the new employees for a long time. I'll also check the HR department, see how they interact with the staff." It was clear that his boss's last words alerted Mark, but he didn't dare ask why he wanted to inspect HR. Things were not going so smoothly at those warehouses. The numerous crowd of job seekers at the employment office indirectly confirmed this. But it was still unknown what Brian was thinking at that moment. He rarely revealed his plans, even to such a trusted person as Mark, and everything related to sudden inspections he kept secret until the last moment. However, he couldn't resist telling about the warehouses. "Well, that's it, Mark. We'll go tomorrow and see how my subordinates work. I have the right to know where my money is going and whether it is being used for selfish purposes or not." Mark nodded in agreement. "In your place, I would do the same, Brian. There can be no question about that. Okay, let me take you home. I still have to go to my mother-in-law's dacha. She still can't figure out that vegetable garden." Looking at him, Brian said, "Okay, let's go. Otherwise, we'll get stuck here for a long time. Listen, do you think that some millionaire has become gluttonous and no longer knows what to do with the money?" Mark almost dropped the steering wheel when he heard this. "Sorry, Brian, but I have a good opinion of you, and you don't seem to me like a gluttonous millionaire." "Oh, sorry, I'm saying the wrong things. My tongue is my enemy. Honestly, I won't talk like that anymore." Brian laughed in response. "It's okay. Nothing terrible. You just expressed your opinion. Remember, Mark, every person in this life has the right to voice their position on any issue." Breathing a sigh of relief, Mark stepped on the gas pedal and flew to his boss's house in 5 minutes. Brian left the car, but before entering the entrance, he cautiously threw over his shoulder, "Don't come for me tomorrow. I'll call and say when it needs to be done. And here's what. Think about why we went to the employment office today at all. I never do anything just like that. There is a hidden meaning in this, and if you guess it, you will get even more privileges from me. Well, and in the case that you also show a good result in your work, you will not be left without financial gratitude." Stepping over the threshold of his apartment, Brian began calling his cat, "There you are, hiding and unwilling to come out. Come on, I'll feed you something tasty now." Incidentally, despite his respectable age, Brian was not married and did not discuss any aspects of his personal life with anyone. The phone suddenly rang. "Yes, Mom, I remember everything and didn't forget, especially since I was going to do it for a long time. Of course, I'll feed her now. I just got home. Who do you want me to meet?" "No, Mom, I strongly disagree." "Okay, we'll talk about it someday." And that was the whole conversation, although he wanted to talk about many things, including how to properly build relationships with subordinates. Lately, Brian increasingly relied on their conscience. But, as it turned out, he was very wrong in that regard. And it seems the situation is forcing him to take everything into his own hands. Even Mark had started to slack off, and Brian no longer saw an executive employee in him, one that could be fully relied upon. All that remains is to rely on his intuition and act as quickly as possible. The cat licked herself, having eaten her fill of tasty pieces of redfish. Looking at the purchased suit, Brian shrugged his shoulders and said to himself, "Well, what can you do? If the mountain won't come to you, you have to reach it yourself." What brilliant plan had matured in his mind remained a mystery. And it was good that Mark didn't suspect anything, otherwise he would have had to change everything on the go. Carried away by his idea, Brian got a ride to the warehouses, and as soon as he entered, he immediately felt the tense atmosphere. It seemed like these were not trading floors, but a territory of a special regime. One of the consultants immediately ran up to him. "Did you want to buy something?" Shaking his head, Brian said, "No, I don't have that opportunity yet, but I want to work for you. I heard you are hiring pickers?" The consultant frowned and replied disgustedly, "Are you sure you didn't come here to shop? Okay, let me take you to our HR people, although I strongly doubt they will hire you." Brian was lucky, and Mark was not yet at the warehouse. Otherwise, the whole operation would have failed miserably. The employees of this warehouse had not yet seen their leader face to face, and he would have immediately figured out what kind of worker had come to them. Knocking on the HR department door, the consultant told someone, "Here's a job candidate for you. Just be careful, he looks kind of like a tramp." Brian was offended but endured the insult because the experiment he devised required it. The HR worker asked him to sit down on a chair. "So you want to work for us? Do you realize how many people want to get hired here? And we don't take everyone, only the most experienced." For this case, Brian had made himself fake certificates as a specialist in loading and unloading operations. "Here, I'm exactly the kind of person you need." The HR person scrutinized his documents for a long time and then said, "I still can't hire you. You understand that the salary here is decent, and we generally don't take anyone in from the street, let alone tramps. But of course, we can always agree, and the price is only 5 salaries, money up front. But for now, sorry, and please leave. You are not needed here. Look for work elsewhere. All the best to you." Brian managed to leave the warehouse just at the moment when Mark soon appeared there. And of course, the HR person told him about the so-called tramp. "Well, good thing you kicked him out. What if he brought us some infection here? There are all kinds of disease going around now." An hour later, Brian himself appeared at the warehouse, in person, but already clean and in an expensive suit. Seeing his boss, Mark immediately began to fawn. Please love and favor, comrades workers. This is our warehouse owner, Brian. The employees began to whisper as if they saw a ghost. In addition, that HR girl somehow nervously bustled about. She had a feeling of unpleasant chill down her whole body. Whatever one may say, a person senses looming danger from afar. But those were just the flowers. The boss had saved the berries for them separately. As if he wanted to enjoy his victory, albeit not as resounding as expected. Looking at those he recently interacted with, Brian said, "Mark, come with me and bring the HR department's records. Don't they have surveillance cameras there?" Dumbfounded by such an act, Mark nevertheless fulfilled the request and was in his office half an hour later. Pointing to the chair, Brian commanded, "Put the disk in the computer and call the HR people here, and don't forget the consultants too." All involved gathered in the office, while the monitor played a silent recording showing the HR worker almost forcibly kicking out the man in old clothes. Glancing at the HR person, Brian asked, "Well, did you see anything familiar there? Just watch carefully. You won't get a second try." The HR worker grabbed her heart. "But I didn't know you would come to us, Brian." Collapsing into the chair, the millionaire sadly said, "And after this, they keep telling me there is a lack of workers at the warehouses. You chase them away yourself and don't hire them properly. Even though he, that is me, showed you specialist certificates. Well, yes, I looked unpresentable, but that can all be fixed here. And you offer bribes for a job, you should be ashamed. Remember, dear subordinates, people should be valued not by their clothes, but by their abilities. So, Mark, prepare an order to disband the HR department. By the way, replace the consultants too, and then go to the employment office and recruit smart and hard-working people there. And don't look at their status. The main thing is that they work honestly and with desire." Brian didn't expect to be treated so unfairly when he came to get hired at his own company. And it wasn't even that he pretended to be poor, almost a tramp. His subordinates were clearly impudent and turned out to be in the wrong places. After the radical reshuffle, as it later turned out, there was less loss of goods from the warehouse, and the new workers worked so well, it was a pleasure to watch. Brian didn't spare Mark either, removing him from the position of his assistant and personal driver. Instead, he sent him to that same warehouse as a storekeeper. In short, the millionaire acted fairly. He hired ordinary people and sent all the fake subordinates to the employment office. Subscribe to our channel and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.